Som, Tsongkhapa. Den kepa shungzang mang tu den, so den, tu shuk chen yarap te. And the kepa dampaldo den nam, karmelamna dawashin den. So, therefore, a great scholar, really, kepa, I don't know, scholar, one way to translate it, but it doesn't have that same academic sense in Tibetan. So sometimes master, scholar master maybe. A scholar master who has heard many excellent teachings and is endowed with morality, practices austerity and is righteous, then an intelligent person should rely upon such a holy being like a moon among the path of stars. The idea being that the moon shines much more brightly than the stars around them. So I thought to start with a quote that like that this week, which is about a spiritual teacher, because we'll be talking about the spiritual teacher very soon in this text, the first major section of the text. As I mentioned before, it's a bit, and it was considered a bit of a kind of making a statement that Tsongkhapa started his text with this section of the spiritual teacher, and there's different ways to understand that. But I think it's good to think about this topic from a lot of different angles. So first of all, I might remind you, some of you might know, early on when Western scholars, Western practitioners also, when they discovered Tibetan Buddhism, a lot of them had quite a negative view of it. They had this view that you might have heard of Lamaism, which was coined by, I think, Henry Waddell, who was one of the British expedition that came. He wrote his book about Lamaism in Tibet, this 1890s. So the idea was that other Buddhisms were about being self-sufficient. There's, of course, that famous quote by the Buddha, be an island unto yourself. But then these Tibetans, it's all about worshipping the Lama. So I think when we hear something like that, of course, if you're in debate, it's good to debate with it and try to point out the flaws in the reasoning, but it's also useful to think about, reflect upon what element of truth there might be in that. Is there something to think about for our own practice? Because we have to be careful. There is a lot of emphasis on the teacher in Tibetan Buddhism. Honestly, I think it's a mistake to say it's Tibetan Buddhism. It really is very much there in any Buddhist tradition. When I was in a college program on Buddhism, I remember we were in Bodh Gaya, a study abroad program, and one of the students refused to prostrate to the Buddha because he said that he found that so antithetical to the Buddha's teachings that one would prostrate oneself before a different person, which is understandable. It's very much a view that we hold in our American culture, and I think when we hear some of the teachings about being self-sufficient in Buddhism, then we can get that idea that it resonates with our idea of what it means to be self-sufficient. But at the other extreme is to kind of give up our own background and then completely adopt a different way of seeing things. Whereas I think it has to be a very careful process to have an entirely different way of thinking about things. Personally, I'd say it's an ongoing process for most of my life now, trying to come to terms with what it really means to relate to a spiritual teacher. So, like we have also in the Dhammapada, Tani dagi gonyengi sventa sushi gonde gyur, tani kona lektuna nipakawe gone gyur. So that means alone I am my guardian. Who else could be my guardian? If only I subdue myself, I'll find a guardian hard to find. So it's really emphasizing this point of self-sufficiency. You can't count on somebody else to save you. That's not the emphasis in Buddhism. As the Buddha said, I show you the path to liberation, and it's up to you to practice it. So it's saying, who else could be my guardian? I have to be my own guardian. This is the Buddha's own speech. So I think it's often useful to think about that in it is a kind of a counterbalance to these teachings. But then also there's a very similar phrase, which I think, in a very similar stanza, which I think opens up the possibility of why it's so important to have a teacher, which is Dani kon dagi gon, dani gagi dryang yin, let dange perchepala, dani nagi pampo yin. So, alone I am my guardian, I am as well my enemy. What deeds I do for good or ill, my witness I alone shall be. So here we see that it's not only that you're your guardian, you can also be your own worst enemy. And this can happen in ways that are not so obvious. I think that's why it's so important to have a teacher, because sometimes we hear people. I've met people in the West who say, I don't need an external teacher. I have that inner guru, which is what it says in the text. It says that ultimately you need to seek your inner guru. That the outer guru is only a provisional manner to reach that. But it's important not to underestimate the importance of that. That unless you have an extraordinary level of so I guess one thing would just say merit. Then it's very hard to actually have the right information from your inner guru, so to speak. Sometimes you can get a very strong sense of something being correct, and sometimes it is correct. But oftentimes our intuitive senses can lead us in quite in the wrong direction. So that's why I think it's essential to have this relationship with a teacher, and not just one teacher, to understand the importance of just in general, as we talk about often here in the monastery, viewing everybody who's senior to you at some level as being a teacher, that you have a lot to learn from people who have other experience, even regardless of whether you take them as a personal teacher, as somebody that you're really trying to emulate. But even if they're in some sense a bad example, they can also have a lot of good qualities, and that's what's so valuable about being here in the monastery, is having this context of so many different practitioners together that you can learn from. When you're in the West, I had this experience growing up in Dharma Center. I say growing up, I was 19 the first time I went to a Tibetan Buddhist Dharma Center, I think. That's right. So, there's kind of this idea that you have a collection of your gurus. People have these pictures of on their altar all these Rinpoches that they've met. And it becomes kind of how do you say? It's definitely, I don't mean to criticize that, because actually I think it's a very good thing in a general sense. But it sort of becomes that you don't have a relationship like we have here, where you have all different kinds of people. There's not just, so you get this idea. I had the same problem. I had the same idea when I was young, which was basically that all Tibetan lamas are exceptional beings, every single one of them, which was probably true for the ones I'd met. I was very fortunate to have met a lot of excellent ones. But then as you're here, you see that people are at different levels, and there's many, there's ways to advance, and some people are, getting it faster than others. But also the strong emphasis in the monastery, as you'll see, is on self-sufficiency. There really is a strong emphasis on developing your own point of view. And, if you go to the rooms of most of the Tibetans, they'll have a few pictures, usually, of different teachers that they have, but it's not like the most prominent thing. The most prominent thing in their room is usually their books. And that's what His Holiness has often said, is that this is the most important thing, is to study the traditional texts. And if what your teacher says contradicts the traditional text, then you have to be very cautious about it. So Holiness says, if your teacher passes away, it shouldn't be the sense that you have to immediately run to find a new teacher, that the most important teacher here is the texts. I think that's him saying that is very relevant for the monks. I think it actually, again, with everything, to say it's entirely good or entirely right or entirely wrong. The other extreme is, we've seen a lot of Western scholarship where they just rely on text and they think we shouldn't interact with actual live people because they don't have, they've corrupted the teachings. I mean, this was some of the explicit views of some of the 19th century scholars, especially. We should not travel to India because it's a degenerate place, but in the past times it was a holy place, and so we study the ancient texts. So being here, you're much less likely to get the wrong interpretation of the text, I think, because going to debate all the time and being in a community of other people who are also practicing this, and the Tibetans don't have a lot of tolerance for self-deceit. They'll point it out to you quite bluntly if they notice you're kind of behaving in a way that doesn't accord with the traditional way of how a monk should behave or how a practitioner behaves. There's no room here for people who think they're great practitioners, as we all maybe learned early on. It's quite a different approach. So I think we have an enormous amount to learn from being here. So I've complicated the issue quite a bit, and I think that's intentional. That with this question of a teacher, it's not so obvious if just the answers are in the text, and then you just do exactly what is said. As you see with Tsongkhapa himself, he presents all different points of view of things, and it takes a long time, as I think I mentioned before, in a different context, about these qualities of maturity and honesty are really central for developing a proper understanding of how to relate to a teacher. And even Lama Rinpoche, he had said that it shouldn't be called guru devotion. That it should be called the correct manner of relating to a spiritual friend. Right, which actually is better translation is Shenyan Denso in Tibetan, right? So Den is to rely on. It doesn't mean to devote to per se. And Sul is the manner, and Shenyan, is virtuous friend. So it's not just a matter of sort of surrendering your willpower, but it's a matter of knowing how to act properly towards a person who is of a significant better, more learning and development than you yourself are, and how you can benefit the most from that relationship. So we'll get to that section in just very briefly, but before that, we're finishing. So I think last week we've been talking about the manner of listening and then explaining the teaching, right? So we finished the manner of listening to the teaching. And then we had the manner of explaining. So we had Shushipi Penyon, right? The benefit, contemplating the benefits of teaching the Dharma. And now we have Tumpatang Chula Rinpoche. So we had the same section actually outlined in the section on how to listen to the teaching. But here's the person who's teaching it, the etiquette they should have towards the Dharma and towards the teacher, meaning not themselves, but the Buddha as the teacher. So, Gyawa Yum Somana. So when the Buddha was teaching the Gyawa Yum, meaning the Prajnaparamita Sutras, the mother of the conquerors, Chomden Denigi Den Shampa Zipatar, so the way that he arranged his seat at that time and did other things. So the way that the manners that he had during while teaching. Chuni Sange Namgiyang Kore Jing Yimbe. So the Dharma is a field of reverence even for the Buddhas. Right? So it's saying that the Buddha is not higher than the Dharma. Even the Buddha himself showed profound respect for the Dharma in the way that he taught in a formal manner. Chula Gupa Chempo Tong, Timpe Yunden Tong, Kandri Nesudende, Gupa Gewa Chao. So then it's saying generate respect through having great respect for the Dharma, for remembering the qualities of the teacher, and then remembering his kindness. So with these three, then you generate respect for the teachings that he gives. So Sampatang Jorwa Jitabu Jepala. So next we have how to do so through thought and through action. Sampa Jorwa. So first Sampani, Lodra Gatso Shupale. So that's a sutra, the sutra requested by Lodra Gatso. lage sumpe dushe nga shakte. So you have five perceptions or discriminations that you cultivate. Rana mempatang. So oneself is the doctor, as the teacher. Chu la men tang. The Dharma is the medicine. Chu nyambala nipatang. So the listeners are the patients. Deshin jepala kibu dampatang. And you see the Buddha as a holy being. And a chugitsu la ringdu nepe dushe kepa. So the discrimination that the Dharma will remain for a long time. So if you remember, these are the same almost exactly as what it was, the discriminations that the students should have. The only difference, it doesn't say that, talks about there about diminishing one's afflictions. But that's part of the way what the students contemplate. Here it's about what the teachers. That one is taken out, and there's only 5 remaining. Other than that, it's exactly the same. And then korla jampa gon. So then also kor retinue, right? So meditate on love for the people listening. That's the point. And shen toa dope draktok tang. So then jealousy, which is concerned that others might be superior to oneself. And a chi shu chepe lelo tang. So laziness that thinks I'll do it later. And a yang yang chepe niewe kyo tang. So then sort of a sadness is not the right word, but like how would you say that? Discouragement. A discouragement of this weariness, thinking I have to explain it again and again. And then dakni drokshing shengi kyon langwatang. So so shengi kyon langwa is that you speak the faults of others, right? Dakni drok is that you proclaim. Right? So I think it's saying that you don't proclaim the faults of others is basically the point. The wording is a bit odd, but it's saying that you're not here to proclaim the faults of others. And it chola peikyu chepa. So peikyu is to conceal, like it means like to hold something back, right? Peikyu. So like it means that like you give some amount, but you hold something back. You don't give the entire teaching. Peikyu. Peikyu chepa ta. Segula sope sangzing la tower pangde. So then the mind that observes requisites such as food and clothing mean that you don't have that intention to get those. So you abandon all of those faults. Right? So the peikyu, just to note, I think there's the famous saying by the Buddha that the closed fist of the teacher has not held anything back. Right? I think that probably is peikyu. There's also a Mahayana sutra called the Peikyu Kido, which we cover that in Madhyamaka, but I wonder if it's saying the opposite. It's saying that there was something held back in the Hinayana teachings, and then in the Mahayana.
Is that withholding?
Yeah, withhold is probably a good word. Yeah, that you give, you hold something back. You don't give everything. You only teach a few things that, So then, so you abandon those faults, and then you say rang tang shen sage tope chirdu. So for the purpose of oneself and others, to achieving the state of a Buddha. Tempe sonam deni. So then there's the merit of having given the teaching, right? Tempe sonam deni dagi dewa yoche do yamdu sampaho. So do you think that is the that is the requisite that makes me happy, right? Yoche. So the point is that I don't need something else. I don't need to be worshipped lavishly. The merit I gain from giving the teaching. That is what I take away from it. I don't need more than that. So do you think that way? And then jorwa, so how you behave. True changing. So first clean yourself. Sangtra tang tempe. So then being endowed with cleanliness. Good sama, good days. So then wear clean clothes. Sangxing idu always sachoksu. Chugi tree tang denla gyune. So then sit on a seat and sit on a cushion on a throne, a Dharma throne, in a place that is pleasant and clean. And a du tsar chipping na kandu duna. So then you recite the mantra for subduing Mara. there's a note in the translation that tells where to find this mantra. I'm not sure actually. I don't know if it's someone we recite regularly. I haven't seen it, but we could look that up. It's probably, well, if we wanted to find it, it's probably in there. There's we have one book that's a Chendral on the LAM.RIM, right? An annotated commentary. It probably has it in there. So de koryo pakse gya sunchedu. So then think in that in the environment up to 100 pakse. So a pakse is a fathom. I think it's about six miles. They say, so 600 miles. De tan de gyurigi lana mionla. So then you think that the Maras and the Mara-like gods, they don't come into this area. On kyang barche chawa minu par, or they come, but they're unable to create obstacles. Lojigetu zubale zumpe. So it says this in the Lojigetu shupido. Right. So probably the sutra is in that. Sorry, the mantra is probably in that sutra. Sumpe ngakte tonna. So then recite that mantra. Shingidan rabdu sewe. So with the very clear faith, luminousness of your face, radiance of your face. Dung epe yenla pe tang tensik tang lung tang nepershedo. So then you have the branch, or the branches. What would we say? The aspect of the teaching, which is ascertaining the meaning, right? Which giving examples and reasons and quotations. So to explain with those. So Dampe Chu Padma Karpolai. So this is as it says in the Lotus Sutra. Kere Daktu Traktu Mepar Ni. So the scholar, or as I said before, maybe scholar master, who is always without jealousy. Natso Tunden Nipe Tamyan Tun. So then teaches a variety of speeches, pleasant speech that is endowed with a variety of meanings. Lelodakyang naporabpangne, and then completely abandons laziness. Kyowa nampe dushe kiemicha, and don't have the discrimination of discouragement. Don't get discouraged when the students don't understand. Kepe miga tamche namprapang. So a scholar should abandon all unhappiness or to dislike for what's being done. Jampe topme korla gompercha, and then meditate on love for the retinue. Yin sen duyang chochok rabdu gong. So day and night should be meditating on the supreme dharma. Kepa deni chewa draktik pe. So that scholar through how would be chewa draktik? How much would that be? 10 million times 10 billion. So what's that? 10 to the 21, I suppose. 10 to the 18th, right? 15th. Yeah, sorry. Math skills are a bit rusty. So 10 to the 15th, I don't know what number that is. So with that many examples, Konam Gushing Dejin Gawache. So then delight your retinue and give them happiness, give them joy. Dela Namyan Topa Jungseme. So then never should have even the slightest wish, meaning wishing for something in return for the teaching. Say tong kom tang sadan shawatang. So food and drink. And so then za and cha, they're both food, right? Sa is like staple food, and cha is like side dishes, you could say. Actually, sa refers technically za is things like rice and dal, and chawa would be things like vegetables and fruit. I don't think I think sometimes they translated it as like hard food and soft food, but it doesn't quite capture it. So good tam melcha chogu namtani. So clothing, bedding, and dharma clothes. So bedding, I mean more like the seat, the cushion you're sitting on, not the beds per se. Namtani. Now I assume dakya misamde. Don't think that it's medicine to cure a sickness. That's what it's saying. Kornam lani chiam milango. So then don't take those from your retinue. So I think it's saying, don't think that you're sick. You need all these requisites, and you keep taking these things from your retinue. Shendu kepa daktu dani tang. So then also, scholars always for oneself. Semchen didak sangi jubar jok. So saying I and myself, myself and other sentient beings, may we attain Buddhahood. Penjir jikten chugan tepade. So then in order to benefit, then teach whatever is the dharma of the world. Dagi dewa yochi kunyam sem. So then have this thought that this is the requisite of happiness for me. Meaning, as it said before, that the ability to benefit and teach the world, that is my reward. Teaching is its own reward. She sumsu. So then finally, you gan la shepatami shepakipar. So then this is the last part of this how to teach, is where and you should and should not teach. Actually, to whom. You meaning gan la. So to whom you should and should not teach. Duedo. So this is the Vinaya Sutra by Gunaprabha. Right? So it's important to know that the Vinaya Sutra is not Gunaprabha's own ideas. It's simply a verse. No, it's not in verse, but it's a condensation of the Vinaya scriptures. Right? He doesn't actually add anything per se. All he does is put it all into a format that was easy for memorization. So really, it's coming from the Vinaya scriptures, the Lungde Shi, right? The four scriptures of Vinaya. Masor michao. So if not requested, do not teach. Shezun batar. So madapa ma she mi sheching. So if they don't request and they don't say anything, so adapa layang ne dapatang ne dishina. Masoryang shidurowani. So here it's saying no dapatang no dishina. So it's saying if they don't request, or even if they do request, you should check the vessel, seeing if this person is qualified or sort of suitable for teaching. And if you recognize that they are, so even if then in that case, even if they don't request, you should teach them, is what he's saying here. Tingazingi Gyapole, so as it says in the King of Concentrations, Chugi Jimpe Cheki Chir, so for the purpose of the charity of Dharma, Kyade Kyola Sodetna, so if you request for it, Rabge Dagi Malap Shi. Malap Shi. Totma Sikte Joparcha. So first you should say, if somebody requests you for the teaching, first of all you should say to them, Rabge Dagi Malabshi. So I think the point is that I haven't trained, I'm not qualified. But Rabge Dagi. Yeah. Anyway, the point is that you should say to them, I'm not qualified to teach. That's the first thing you should say. Kyuni Sheshin Keyana. So if you are a scholar and you do know, you do have some understanding. L.M.RIM.CHEN.MO Dunduni. Dagijitar Shinuje. So then you should so then you should say to them, in the face of somebody like you, who's so great, how could I give any kind of explanation? You know better than I do. Treldudrupa Michai. So Treldudrupa Michai is saying, don't just rush to talk. Don't just rush to give the teachings. Nodadapa Chene Cha. So first examine the vessel, examine the person. Kyade Nuni Shigir Na, so Madapkyang Sheparcha. So if you know that they are a suitable vessel, then even if they don't request, you should teach them. She Sumso. It's a bit funny because he says, as it says in the Vinaya Sutra, don't teach unless requested. And then he says you should teach even if they don't request. So it's actually, maybe you could say he's giving a lungdon for the sutra. It's interpretable. So Shenyang, Due Dole. So also as it says, again here in the Vinaya Sutra of Gunaprabha, Dubala Dreng De Chumi Shipararu. So do not teach to somebody who is sitting while you are standing. No. Yeah. Do not teach while somebody is sitting Tupala, dreng de ya. Don't teach to somebody who was sitting while you were standing. This actually, this is the section of the Vinaya Sutra where he's summarizing the Nietzsche, right? You might know the fifth class. You have 5 classes of vows as a Gelong. So the 5th class is the Nietzsche, the faults, misdeeds. So those are the of 112 of those. So there are some that are related to teaching the Dharma and to whom you should not teach. So here it's not, again, it's not Guna Prabhu's own idea. It's simply, these are actually the Gelong vows that he's summarizing here. The Gelong does not do this. So Dubala Drengde Chipami Chao. So don't teach when somebody is seated and you are standing. Or maybe, I think it must mean when you're seated and they're standing. Because you would, for example, stand in front of a class and give a lecture. Might be appropriate. Gengawan Sangye often did that at Shura. He was a gecko. He would give teachings during the Kortso. So he was standing, of course, as gecko. So I don't think that's inappropriate per se. It's the opposite, when you're sitting and the other person is standing. And Yawa la dukte chumije. So then because then when it does seem to say when you're seated and they're lying down. Of course, there's understood to be that there's the exception when they're sick, right? Then tumbala dubala, then maala dukte mishiparo. So that's very clear, right? So then it's very clear. The first part is what they're doing. So it does actually say you should not teach when they're seated and you're standing. You should not teach when they're lying down and you're sitting. And it says when they're sitting on a high seat and you're sitting on a low seat, you should not teach to them. Nyapatang zampoyang dejino. So also good and bad. I think it's saying when they're wicked and you're good. Maybe that, yeah. Dundu drowalat chine drojing mishiparo. Yeah, so then when somebody is walking in front of you, don't walk behind them and teach them. I think actually, so it must be Ngebadan Zampoyan Dejino they must be talking about the seats, is my guess. Like you're sitting on a bad seat, the other person is sitting on an ornamented throne. Right? The person who's teaching should be sitting on the better seat. It's probably more likely what it's saying. Lam le droala, lam kitram ne droshing mishiparo. So then the person who's walking in the middle of the path, the person who's walking on the side of the path, it shouldn't teach them because it's sort of the lower status. And they go yopatang, zipatang. So yeah, this is all in the Vinaya, right? The person who's wearing a hat, who's zipa, I think they're this is their clothes. Their clothes are hanging too long or are too short. That's the idea. Nyagongdu and their niwetang and then detangle, right? Takbar no alamichao. So yeah, bunched up. I think the hair. It's talking about the hair here, right? The hair is sort of let loose down, or it's sort of tied up on top, or dakpa is the back of your head, right? So your hair is kind of tied up. How do you say? What? Yeah, I'm wondering if that's. Don't teach to someone with the ponytail. I don't think that's quite the point. Yeah. That's what that one is. Nyagondu nua. It's tied up on top. Right, let's see. Maybe better I check here rather than giving you the wrong impression. Yeah, his head is covered up. So upper and lower world is pulled up, right? Zepadan zarwa, and then folded and placed on the shoulder. I see. Yeah. So that's what it's not the hair. It's that the robe is placed. His robe is folded on the shoulder. Arms across, hands on the shoulders. Yeah. So it's just talking about the placement of their hands on their shoulders. Actually, we're going to debate this next week. So next week I'll be able to give you a much more precise explanation. We're just about reached this part of the Vinaya. So go doker chen. So then they're saying, a person who's wearing a helmet or wearing ornaments in their head, or chupen, right? Wearing a crown, chupen chen, trengwa chen. They're wearing or say rosary, or they say, like ornaments in their head. Tang dripatang, and the head is sort of wrapped up in something. Mishepaho. Right? So they're not showing the right etiquette. Right, their head is ornamented in that way. And LAM.RIM.CHEN.MO ta shumpatang. So then they're riding on a horse or riding on an elephant. And a kyok tang shumpeteng na tukpatang chilham yumbala nishibo. Somebody who's wearing shoes. Do not teach somebody wearing shoes. Now, of course, we sometimes do that if we go and give a lecture in a university or something. You don't have to ask all the class to take off their shoes. But I think that, saying sedan chair or a carriage. But I think that the understanding, of course, is that with all the minor rules in the Vinaya, there is permission in certain contexts, right? So it's very important to know about those things. Otherwise, you can think that these are like, you can't break the rules. But really, you're not breaking the rule if there's permission. That's an important thing to understand. So the main point, if there's permission, if your own or someone else's life is in danger, then there's permission for anything except for things that are naturally negative or drinking alcohol. That's kind of a group. Naturally negative and alcohol. Those all fit together. There's never permission for those in any context. And then, so if your own or other's life is in danger, or if it will obstruct your own or other's virtue, right? So the example that's given for one's own virtue is if that you shouldn't, a monk should not engage in business transactions. However, if you're in a situation where you are having to pay back a debt, and the only option is to steal or to do business, then it obstructs your virtue not to do business because they need to be forced to steal. And for somebody else, so the example is a bit complicated, but see, Gelong is not supposed to sleep in the same room as the Getzel for more than 3 nights. But if you're in a situation, I suppose this could arise. What?
Like a shotgun.
A shotgun, yeah. Well, what about a shotgun?
What they share with the younger students.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, that's not necessarily appropriate according to the Vinaya, but it might fit this thing, although it's not exactly the same point. But the point that is given here is that if it's, for one thing, it's a yarne, and then secondly, there's a group of gelongs who are bad influence, and you don't want your student to be influenced by them. So you have a choice between leaving or having the student sleep in your room. And actually, in that case, it will obstruct your virtue of keeping yarne. So you better to have the student sleep in your room. But it could be similar if the gen really thinks that it's for the student's own benefit. Maybe that would be possible. But yeah, that's sort of a side issue. My point is more that when there's something that will obstruct somebody keeping their morality purely, it's better to choose the lesser of 2 evils, so to speak. And then if it will obstruct your traversing the paths, right, that's quite important. So the example here for oneself is if a monk should not store food, but if you want to go to do a retreat in the mountains, and you would be able to generate the path in your continuum, and the only option is to store food rather than trying to having to go all the way down to beg, then it would obstruct your chain of the paths. Then you should actually store food, and there's permission to do that. And then for others is that a monk, a gelong should not instruct a gelongma at night. But if in this happened in the sutra, that Shariputra recognized that this young gelongma named Peldenma, that if he taught her that evening, she would attain arhatship, and he did so, and she attained arhatship. And the Buddha said, excellent, that was a good decision. So if you recognize that there's some specific benefit in that context for this person achieving higher states. So these are all examples, but it's to see that in all those contexts there's permission. And then there's other minor ones. So if it would harm your body or your health, or somebody else's body or health, if it harm your merit, or if you could do some meritorious practice like singing, you can chant to the Buddha. And then if it would harm your requisites, so for example, like your monk shouldn't touch gold, but if there is a gold statue of the Buddha that's sitting out in the rain, then you probably should go and pick it up because it's the requisite of Sangha. So in those cases, the latter three, then you have to check yourself. You have to check what is more beneficial in that situation, to guard the vow or to do the action that would be beneficial. So likewise here, if it says, for example, if somebody is lying down, you shouldn't teach them. But if they're sick, then you either don't teach them or you teach them lying down. Then of course there's permission to do so, because it's virtuous to do so, and there's the benefit outweighs the harm. But generally speaking, this is the etiquette. So you have Tengna, Chil. So we got through that. So not someone wearing shoes. So like I said, with teaching university students, they're wearing shoes, but you're not going to say, well, I'm not going to talk until you all take your shoes off. If they're all new to Buddhism, it would be probably not go over so well. So lakna karavatang. So then in your hand, you're holding or the person listening is holding a staff in their hand, or an umbrella, dok, or tsun, a weapon, relji, a sword, dracha, a knife, topa. They're holding all those things. Or gyucha, if they're wearing armor. I don't think that happens that much these days, but it's maybe like the SWAT team, that kind of thing. So dedakle dopalani. So then the opposite of that, dopalani shedurungde. So the opposite is suitable to teach as a person. Shedurungde minawe wanted chipoho. So this is all from the perspective of the person not being sick. If they're sick, then there's permission for a lot of these. So jukdu tumondu didar chawani. So then at the end, what do you do how do you behave at the end of the teaching? Is the point, right? We had the actual teaching. Now what do you do when the teaching's finished? Shepatan yempele jongwe gewa nam. So both the teacher and the listener, all the virtue they've accumulated, negaptan tardaki mune namsu dumba drapo ngawar chao. So dedicate it with a fierce ardor, fervent ardor, for all the purposes of the prayers, temporal and ultimate prayers. So like that, teach in that way. If you teach and listen in that way, so then it's no doubt that every session of teaching will have incredible benefit. That is as it's described earlier. So then, if it does not become the essential point of teaching and listening the Dharma, okay, I see. So it will purify all the past karmic obscurations that you have accumulated in the past through not showing respect to the Dharma and the teacher of the Dharma, through it not hitting the point of teaching and listening. I mean, you did it in the wrong way. So now by doing it in the right way, you purify that. Sarda supa nam kyang prochepatang. It'll cut the continuum of continuing to do that. You'll stop doing it in the wrong way. Chepatan yepetsu neru songway. So then by having it be done in the right way, neru songway shepe dangaki kyang gyula pendopa gyurwa zikne. So you see that the instruction that will be given will benefit your continuum. So chena tampa ngama tamche de la ninden zeching. So all the previous holy beings, towards this point, they put a lot of special effort into it. It's ninden, they really focused and insistently did these things. Kepar du tamgak di lama gomanam nenden shindu chewerzedo. So especially in this particular instruction, that means Lam.RIM teachings, the past lamas put incredible effort and time into this. They really worked hard to preserve this. So Deni Dampa Chempo Nangde. So this appears to be a great instruction itself. Nangde Dila Niba Maniching Lona Magyuraway. So if you don't gain certainty about this and it doesn't come to your mind, Lona Magyuraway, Che Zapla Gache Jitam Shekyang. So then however profound or extensive the Dharma you explain might be, ta duda bapatar, la duda bapatar, sorry. It's like a god becoming a demon. La duda bapatar, gyurne, so it would be like that. Chu dini, so then it appears oftentimes that this happens, that the Dharma itself becomes a support for the afflictions. It just increases one's afflictions. De wena, so for that reason, se chikne ma chukna. Chungai bar she sewatar yinpe. So that as it's said, then from if you don't make a mistake on the first day of the month, then it will go to the 15th of the month, the middle of the month. I have to check what that means. If you mistake the date, the date from the first day of the lunar month, the error lasts until the 15th day. Machukta, se chikne, machukta, chunge ba. So chuk is to make a mistake, right? So it's saying not mistake, but the translation, which makes sense, is saying if you make a mistake on the first day, it will last. I'm not sure what the ma is doing there then. But anyway, if you make a mistake, if you mistake the first day, then you'll keep mistaking every other day, right? You count the first day as the second day, then the second day becomes the third day. So your error will continue. Nyempata shepa lam tu tongsu dila. So as for the way of teaching, or making teaching and listening become the path. Lo tan depa nangi pene. So all intelligent people should make effort in that. Chepa tan nyempa. Jungre. So every time that you teach, every time you listen, jungregi matare tan depa chade. So then always, at the very least, do these things. Dapa dombe ngondro chokni diyan bechiro. So this is the supreme preliminary practice for giving the instructions. Didakni tsik mangsu dokne. So fearing too many words. Che nam tupade. So all the really essential things I condensed. Geperni shene shiperchao. So if you want to know more extensively, then you should know it from other sources. Dabe don dro sindo. So now that's the preliminary for the instruction. So this is the whole preliminary section, right? So now we get to from the back at the beginning of the text. So very begin page 3 of mine. I don't know about yours. We had Chokong super den bechir zebapo chewa dempa. Right, so showing the greatness of the author so that you understand the the nobleness of the source of the Dharma. Damag la gubra kepechir. Chugi chewa the dempa. So then for the purpose of generating respect for the instruction, then you talk about the greatness of the Dharma itself. Chewa ni tan de bechula nyenche didar chawa. So then the way that you teach and listen to this Dharma that has those two greatnesses. And then finally, Damba Ngugi Loma Jidar Triwe Rimba. So then the stages of guiding the disciples through the actual instructions. So that's going to be the rest of the text, pretty much. And so then, that'll have its own stages. So it's Damba Ngugi Loma Jidar Triwe Rimba Ni. Langit Sawa Shenin Dembetsu. So the root of the path, which is as we said before, the correct manner of relying on a spiritual friend. Shenin Dembetsu. Dang. Dene. Lo Jidar Jangwei Rimpa. Right, so having relied on the teacher, then how to train your mind. The stages for how to train your mind. So Dambo the Ni. The first has Ngepa Kepe Chir Jungse Trode Shepa. So then a little bit of a digression so that you gain correct ascertainment of the point. And then Kyongsu Dordu Dempao, right? So then a brief explanation of the actual way of doing so. And so first he's going to explain what we were talking about at the beginning of the talk, right? All these, getting a proper understanding of why it's so important to have the right relationship with the teacher. So Daboni, Nibringe Badubale. So in the condensing the ascertainments, the advice. This is by Atisha, right? Rikla nepe gansakte shenien dabar denchela. So a person who's abiding in the correct manner of doing things, shenien dabar denchena. So then they rely on a spiritual friend, on a holy spiritual friend. Shetang potawe sungdro doe trikpa le kyang. So that Geshe Dulpa Doa, who is a student of Geshe Potawa, right? He put together his sayings, the sayings of Potawa that were codified or put together by Geshe Dulpa. So Mengak Tamche Dube Koni, so the head or the main point that condenses all of the instructions, Shenien Daba Mitamayan. So it's not to abandon the spiritual friend. She Jomatar Loma la Gula Yunde Nachi Kiwatang. So for the student themselves, then even to generate just a single virtue or single quality in your continuum. Tang, Chiu Nachi Dripa Yenche de Yenche. So then also just to diminish a single fault in your continuum. Delek Tamchigi Jungne Ni. So the source of all goodness and happiness, Dampe Shenin Yinpe, it's the holy friend. Yinpe, Tolmar, Te Dempe Tsul Gelche. So at the beginning, the way of relying on them properly is very important. So Jandu Sempe Denule. So as it says in the Bodhisattva Pitaka, the collection of sutras. Dorna Jandu Sempe Chupa Tamche Tolpching Yonsusupatang. So in short, a bodhisattva's to attain all the practices of a bodhisattva's and to complete them. Dejandu parol de chimpatang. So likewise the perfections, the practices, and then sa, the grounds, zuba. Right, so then it's going through the different qualities that you cultivate: patience, tingizin, concentration, nilbarjepa, so clairvoyance, sung tang popatang. So sung is retention, right? It's the ability to remember all of the teachings, and popa is like confidence. It has to do with the ability to then impart that to others, not to be to have a kind of ding, right? Ding means confidence. So that you're not bashful about being able to say. You feel confident to speak about it. Ngoa tam molam tang. So it is sungdam popa, right? It's quite a deep subject. If you have a chance to read about these, there's a lot about these in the Mahayana Sutras, so I can't give a simple translation, but I think retention and confidence. And then Ngoata Monlam, so that's dedication and prayers. Sangegichu Tamche Topching, so then you attain all the qualities of a Buddha. Yonsuzupari, and complete them. All of that, Lama la rak le, all of that depends or hinges upon the Lama. Lama Tsawar Gyur, so the Lama becomes the root. Lama le jung, it all comes from the Lama. Lama kene tang kechiru gyur. So the Lama becomes the source for all of it that are rising. Lama ke, the Lama generates them. Lama pel, the Lama increases them. Lama laten, they all depend on the Lama. Lama gyur gyurpadako, they all, and the cause of all of them is the Lama. The Lama becomes the cause of all of them. So this is a good text because we could ask Henry Waddell if he's read this, right? This is an Indian text, so it's not Tibetan. So maybe the Indians were also Lamaists. I don't know, but it's clear that this was not an idea that was invented in Tibet. This was something that they were continuing the tradition in India of this importance of the Lama for one's development. So Potawa Shelnekian, so as Geshe Potawa said, Namtro Drupala Lama le Gyalchewa Mede. So in order to attain liberation, there's nothing more important than the Lama. Sindi Chawa Tene Chepe. So if you took up the activities of this life, and then Chepe Chopala Yang, so even if you're just satisfied with the activities of this life, Login Mepar Miongna. So if you don't have someone to teach you, they won't come about. Right? The point is that even for worldly things, if nobody teaches you, you're not going to just figure it out yourself. Nyansa ne on matak dro manyon we sa. Dro. So those of us who have just come here from unfortunate states of rebirth, and we're trying to go to a place we've never been before, which means higher states of Dharma, higher states of the path. Lama mepa kind of on. So how could such a thing come without a teacher, right? So some things need to be taught. Right? You don't just learn them spontaneously. It's interesting. I was reading this last year that, of course, it makes sense if you can all know this from our own experience, but maybe we take it for granted. You don't need to teach children to speak, right? It seems to be quite natural to human beings. They have to be around other people who speak, of course, but you don't have to instruct them how to speak. But you do have to teach them to read. A child will not learn to read just by looking at books and watching his parents read. So there are some things that require explicit instruction. So I think the point here is that this is something that how to follow a spiritual path. It's not something that is just innate in us. This is a question that comes up quite a bit when you study about the Chittamatra view. When he study Kunji in the 8th year of the program, right? Where is the imprint for knowing how to do this? So, like, if you have an imprint from a past life of behaving in a particular way, then it'll be easier when you train in it in this life. It doesn't just happen spontaneously, but it will come very easily. So, where is the imprint for having trained in the Dharma? If we haven't since beginningless time, have not trained in it. So the Chittamatra anyway has this idea that you have this innate imprint that's been there since beginningless time that can be activated. But in the Mahayana, the Madhyamaka doesn't accept that, right? So for them everything has to come through training. It's just to start from zero, so to speak. Of course, you may have had some training in the past life, but nevertheless, it takes a lot of work. And as I was saying before, right? So I'm alone. I am my guardian, but I am as well my enemy. Right? It's very easy to go the wrong direction. So that's why it's so important to have someone who can guide you, who knows the path quite well. So maybe we can have question and answer.
I hope this is helpful. I just maybe very very basic, but when I was grappling with these objections that you were mentioning in the beginning, with what Waddell and others were saying, one specific explanation was very helpful. That was regarding the teacher just being a field, right? So a field can't save you. A field can't take your suffering away, but it is what you do with the potential of a very fertile field. If you say, this is my fertile field, but then you're careless, then all kinds of poisonous things grow because it is so fertile. But if you take specific care, then a lot of medicinal herbs and everything will grow there. So I think that was for me very helpful to get this explanation of why the image of the supreme field of merit was used to show that yes, it is faster and more efficient if done rightly than simply saying I don't enter a relationship with a teacher, but it's still up to you. It's up to your effort, and it's up to you to discriminate what is a poisonous, what is a non-poisonous thought. And so that's how I kind of felt like, okay, I can understand how these objections wouldn't upset my mind, which you were. I'm sorry, this is very, very, very basic, but maybe it was also helpful for anyone else.
Sure. Yeah. I think that's the point. Is how I think with the objections, it's very good to, you want to be careful. You don't want to just drown yourself in objections. But sometimes it's good to expose yourself to objections, because otherwise, eventually, they'll come when you're not expecting it, and you won't have an answer. So it's very good to think about, these things, take them seriously, and not just dismiss what people say. This person, Waddell, this is what he observed. You can't say it's not what he observed. Whether he interpreted it correctly, we can question, but there's some reason that this person had this thought when he saw this thing, and so it's useful. It's useful to have people come to the monastery. We find also, you've seen this. Otherwise, it becomes very insular, and people on the outside who aren't part of this system can often notice things that are quite obvious that we don't notice when we're here, and we're all just kind of in the same milieu.
Well, this idea of being like self-sufficient, it seems to kind of contradict like interdependence, which is quite a fundamental aspect of Buddha's teaching.
Yeah, well, I think that may be kind of what I was saying at the beginning, that there's different ways to be self-sufficient, and I think this idea that this student had on my study abroad program, that self-sufficiency means you shouldn't prostrate to the Buddha. It's like 100% everything comes from you. Whereas here in this tradition, I think there's more of an understanding of self-sufficiency. Doesn't just mean inherent existence, right? Everything is dependent on other things, and you have to. It's something you develop too. It's something you cultivate. It's not so useful to tell a 3-year-old child to be self-sufficient, but gradually, as you get older, you get more and more of that. But at any point, it's not that you're 100% self-sufficient. There's, as I said, it's something that's not so obvious. It takes a lot of years of practicing this and observing it. And I think it's often very helpful to look at other people. You don't have to judge them, but look at other people who practice and see what happens based on their different choices and their ways of approaching these things. And see if people who say I'm self-sufficient, I don't need a teacher. Well, what happens in their practice in 20 years? Does that work? If it works, then maybe we should take it seriously. But if it doesn't work, then you think, well, what could they have done differently? But then the opposite is, people we might find who say that I have 100% faith that my teacher is perfect in every way, and nothing anybody can say can sway me from that. You have to look very closely at both how they're saying it and how it reflects in their actual behavior and their actions. In some cases, maybe that really is the right attitude. But in some cases, I think we see that that attitude at the beginning, then in 10 years' time, they go the opposite direction, and they say, I don't want to have anything to do with that person anymore, because at first they were perfect, and now they're the cause of all the faults. And so it's both, you're kind of too, again, I think I say an immature view, that you haven't really considered all the different possibilities and all the different information, all the different things that you're sort of being presented to you. You're just seizing on one of them. So then you're not able to really actually accurately assess how things are. Whereas if you really accurately assess things and you still have that view for your teacher, then that's quite honorable. I think that's quite a sign of somebody who's really cultivated this practice in a meaningful way.
Even in the Western method or culture of study, like if you're studying at university, you have a professor, right? They become the person that you feed off for, kind of your answers and a lot of your
Well, also that's an important thing, that to look at how that kind of thing has changed in the West. When I first came to your country, when I was 15, I was thinking of studying abroad actually at Westminster, in London. So I attended some of the classes at the school there, and the first thing I noticed was that the teacher sat on a higher seat than the students. We would never do that in America. So I think there's, Western culture has gone through different phases of this, and different countries are different. But certainly, as from what I can tell in recent times, and as I understand, I haven't been in the country much for the last 20 years, but it's even changing more and more, is this lack of respect for elders and respect for teachers, which is quite unfortunate. Because how can you really learn if you don't respect a person, at least in a formal way in the class environment? It doesn't mean you have to devote to them and think this person is enlightened, but accept that in the context of this class that I want to take, this person has more information than I do, and if I treat them with respect and put them in a sense of in a higher position than myself, then I have a lot to gain from that. So I hope that people, people in the West do in the better situations, they do have that understanding, and there is that tradition in our cultures. But we have to cultivate it sometimes too, because there can be the other side of it, with people kind of not seeing the value of holding someone in respect and thinking that I'll lose my autonomy if I do that, or this sense maybe that if I entrust that much to one person, then I'll be abused, that they're going to abuse that power, which is possible for sure. That's why it has to be entered into carefully. It doesn't mean that every situation, every relation where the one person is in a position of power is going to turn into abuse. It depends on a lot of different factors, and it has to be something to be watch out for. But it doesn't mean that we should just thereby reject that approach entirely.
That question actually came up in the debate school, and one of the students was asking, how do you know that your teacher is enlightened or not? Mm-hmm. And then how to debate that. And then luckily, it wasn't me put on the spot. But I was thinking afterwards that one can at least infer from if you follow the advice, and each time it turns out well when you follow, and each time it turns out badly if you don't follow, then it's a clear indicator that at least that's worth following, and it's at least much more pure and much more enlightened than myself. So there, you could keep up the faith from your own experience, and likewise, you can say also. Maybe it's good not to take a bit of distance from the teacher, because if I follow that advice, then something negative happens, right? And so, I don't want to go.
Well, so the question, this comes up in debate, right? When you're in basic debate and you're debating about colors and shapes, and it doesn't seem so relevant, but in later years, you'll have these debates quite a lot. Can you prove that there is such a thing as a Buddha, first of all? Then can you prove a particular person as a Buddha? Is there any way how can you ascertain that? Can it be understood through inference? You're not going to be able to have a direct perception that someone else is a Buddha unless you yourself are a Buddha. But is there a way to use inference to infer that someone else's level of understanding or level of attainment of the path? So that's something I'll leave here, because I don't think I could have a whole session on that, talking about that point. But that's in debate. That's what debate is for: is to find a way to ask these questions and to examine them. I would say yes, it is a useful exercise, because part of it's not just a matter of intellectual speculation. It's seeing what happens when you're in this relationship with this person, but that doesn't. It also shouldn't be taken as 100% certainty that okay, so if I follow this person's advice, things go well. So I followed the advice 4 times and things went well, and twice I didn't follow the advice and twice things didn't go well. Well, that's pretty good odds, but it's still, we wouldn't say astronomically unlikely that this was just a coincidence, right? So you have to be very careful, and this is what is encouraged here in this monastery. That's what I come to really appreciate, is that there is not a sense that you should just take things because it makes sense to you. You have to really ask all the possible counterpoints, because then you'll get a real certainty. Otherwise, if it's like, well, I think they're probably a Buddha because I feel good when I'm around them, then then that, and in the long run, that's not a very stable basis for relationship of faith in somebody. So it's good. You start to ask that question, and maybe in debate, gradually those things will actually become part of the topics of debate. Okay. Any other questions? No? Okay. Yeah, so we can do the closing prayers.
From my two collections,
vast space that I was working with that, this practice for a great length of time. Become the chief leading Buddha for all those minds whose Tamai is blinded by ignorance. Even if I do not reach this state, may I be held in your loving compassion for all my lives, Manjushri. May I find the midst of great pathings, teachings, and may I please all the Buddhas by my practice. Using skillful means drawn by the force of compassion, may I clear the doubts from the minds of all beings, the points of the path as I have discerned them. May I hold this teaching for a very long time. With my heart going out with great compassion, whatever most teachings have not yet spread, once spread have declined, may this pleasure of happiness and aid.
With the minds and thoughts
The wish for liberation be granted bounteous peace, and the Buddha's nourished for a long time. With this graded path to enlightenment completed through the wondrous virtuous conduct of the Buddhas and their sons. With all human beings with limited diversity, of decisions of the path, never be part of all of their lives, be without praise by the Buddhas. When in accordance with the 10-fold Mahayana virtuous practices, may he always be assisted by the mighty ones, and oceans of prosperity spread everywhere.